Hello and welcome to tutorial 141, and in this tutorial we're going to be looking at the option chain provider, and specifically we're going to be using it to find the options for the E-mini, and then we're going to be plotting the value of the close for those options using price series providers. So what we're going to do, and I have to say this is quite a simple example, but hopefully it will give you some basics to allow you to do something a little bit more complicated and or useful. So we're going to be using three methods, or creating three methods. We're going to create a simple method to create the OCP, option chain provider. We're going to create another method which will create the PSP for the symbol names that we're getting from the option chain provider. And then the third method is going to print some information about those options. What it's also going to do is create a PSP, a price series provider for each of the options, and store that in a dictionary. And then later in the program, we're going to plot the values. And you can see here, we've got a chart showing the E-mini, and then we've got 8 options plotted below, calls and puts. So let's dive in, and you'll notice I'm doing this in TradeStation 10, and the reason for that is it will work, this program will work in 9.5, but the help information and the toolbox element are not there in 9.5, so this makes it a little easier to do. So let's start with creating the OCP, and I'm going to use the toolbox, make things a little easier, and I'm going to rename this to be OCP. Just going to comment that out for the moment. It's basically saying that we're already using the name. Some of this we will modify when we copy it into our program. We're going to use a very small number of expirations and strikes just to keep this simple, and a very few fields. In fact, we're going to have ask and ask size and bid, like so. And we want to load this, so I'm going to set that to true. Time zone we're going to modify, real time's fine, and let's just put in a state change event. So let's tidy things up a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the designer generated code and copy that. And what we're going to do is change this declaration of an OSP into a little method. So we're going to call that OCP load. So method void OCP load. I'm going to delete this one from the tray at the bottom. And this one is going to have an input. It's going to be a string, and it's going to be the name of the symbol. So what we can now do is change the hard-coded name of the symbol to OCP symbol. And if you'd noticed, I'd already added some of the namespaces that I knew we were going to be using. One of those is TS data market data, so I can delete this. Just to tidy things up a little bit. Let's get rid of some of these unnecessary comments. Now, one of the things that I want to do is to determine the time zone based on the time zone of the chart, and there is a little bit of code that we can use to do that, and I'm just going to copy and paste it, and you can probably do the same. We're just going to replace the bit of code which says OCP time zone is local. We don't want it hard coded. We're going to set it depending on what the time zone of the symbol is. And then immediately after load, we're going to say, we're going to try and count the OCP, and this will force the thing to be loaded before we try and do other things. Like so. And then for the state changed, we're just going to print a little bit of information which will tell us about when the OCP is actually loaded. So we could say print OCP state changed, sender to string, and then args dot new state to string, like so. So let's verify that so far. Okay, now we need to uncomment this because we do actually need that. Okay, little spelling error. Options count. And incidentally, if we were not sure about that, what we could do is right click here and then have a look at the help, and you'll see all the available things. And one of those is option count, all the properties. We'll be looking at that again later. Okay, so that's the first method. So now let's look at the second method, which is creating the PSP. Or the PSPs rather, and again let's start in the toolbox and say price series provider. That's already selected. Properties, going to call it PSP. Real time, local time zone, we're going to change that as we did before. Load to true. Symbol, this is going to be actually the symbol of the it's actually going to be an input, so let's just leave that at the moment. This is going to be daily in our situation, and I'm hard coding this. Of course, you would probably want to make it as an input. Okay, and then just to make sure that we gather all the information about what's going on in the program, I'm just going to create two events. Okay, so and what we can now do is go back in and modify the program to make the changes that I referred to. Notably, we want to make sure that whether it's exchange time or local time is something which is determined depending on the symbol. So let's go to the designer generated code, and we're going to copy this. And make some changes as we did before. What this method is going to do is create the price series provider and then return it to the program, because we're going to be creating several. And again, we're going to have an input as a name, similarly to what we did before. Because we want this to cover all the bars that are on the chart, or at least as much of them as there is data available for, we're going to set this to bar date time. And Bear in mind this is run right at the beginning on the first bar of the chart, and so we will, or at least the max bars back bar of the chart. So this will make sure that the first date is set back to then. And then we need to update this for the time zone, and we can use very similar syntax to that which we used before. So I'm going to copy that and then just modify the syntax a little bit, because now we're using a PSP rather than OCP. Now, because we probably need some way of distinguishing between the PSPs, I'm going to change this a little bit to include the name of the symbol. I'm going to move the events before we load the PSP. And incidentally, the program that will be available for download will be commented throughout. And we're going to do the same little trick that we did before, just to make sure that this is loaded before we try and use it, like so. And of course we need to return the PSP, because as you saw at the beginning of this method, we are returning a price series provider, as opposed to a method where we just got void. Okay, so I'm going to try and verify that. Okay, we need to delete this. I will try again. And the reason for that is we have not created a variable for the PSP. And we need to do that on the first line of this method. So we're going to say vars price series provider PSP. And we also need a begin. So there we go. And return is spelt incorrectly. Okay, so far so good. What I also should do while we're working on this method is just do something with those events. So we're just going to put in a simple print statement, since this is really just to show you what's happening rather than we necessarily need to do something here. So I'm going to say PSP state changed, and then a little bit of information about the PSP. Now we're creating several PSPs, so what we need to do is find out which one we're talking about. So I'm going to say sender as type price series provider, close that in brackets, and then we can say period name, like so. And then we can also get the sender to string, see what that gives us, and then the args dot new state to string. Like so. Verify that. And it's very similar for the update. So I'm just going to copy that. So it's PSP updated. And here it's going to be args dot reason to string. Verify. Okay, so we've just got one final method to create, and that is going to be the method which is going to print the information and create the PSPs. We're going to call this print OC. So let's create that here. Method void print OC, and this is going to have an input of an option chain provider. Which is going to be called OCP2, just to distinguish it from the other one. And variables, it's going to have something called an option security, and you'll see what that is in a moment. I'm going to call that OS. And it's going to have an int counter. And then we need the begin. And eventually an end somewhere. And what we're going to do, because the option chain provider contains information on several options, we need to go through them and then get some information about them. So we can do that using a counter. So we're going to say for counter equals 0 to OCP2, which is the option chain that we're working on, point, and then we use the same count that we used before, option count, and it's zero based, so we need to go -1, and then we need to do begin, another begin end, and we need to find out something about each of those options. So if we were to look at the option chain, OCP2, and we go point, you will notice that one of the options here is option. Now that's a little difficult to understand, so what we're going to do, just going to right click on that and say definition of OCP2, and we'll get the help, and this will tell us all the properties. And if we look, you'll see option with an index gets the option security collection with the specified index. So that is what we need, and that, if we click on that, you're going to see that you get something completely irrelevant. I don't know why, perhaps a little bug in the help, but if you go to option security, you'll see that we can get information like exchange, expiration style, region, strike, etc., etc. So let's do that. So we'll say OS, which is our option security, equals point option, and then we need to use square brackets, and then we're going to just go through with our counter. And then each time we've got that information, we're going to do a couple of things. One is create the PSP, and the other is do some printing. So let's do the printing first. That's probably slightly easier. In fact, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy and paste what I've already done before to save a lot of typing. Okay, now to make that work properly, we need to set up the dictionary. Now we've already created a variable for the dictionary, but what we now need to do is, well, first of all, let me just go to the one statement, because we need to actually create the dictionary to start with. So we come down here, and we're going to use a once statement, once, begin, end, and we want to clear the print log, like so. We also need to create a new dictionary. Now I've called that dict PSPS. You may remember right back from the variable, or in fact PSP dict. So let's just create that. PSP dict equals new dictionary. We're also going to be using a vector to store the names of the options. I've called that option symbols. Equals new vector, like so, and we will continue that in a moment. But what we're now going to do is create the PSPs and store them in the dictionary. So the dictionary, as I've just created, is called PSP dict. So PSP dict, and the index of this is going to be the name of the option. So that is going to be os.security. symbol to string. And what we want to do is store a PSP in that. Now we just created a method to create the PSP and we called it, I believe, create PSP. And we're going to feed into that a string. And the string we're going to use is the symbol name, the option symbol name this time. And we get that from the OS. We're getting an OS for each of the elements in the option chain provider. So it's OS dot, and we're looking for symbol, and we need that to be to string. So that's doing two things. It's creating the PSP, but it's also storing it in the dictionary. So let's just verify that, see if we've made any typing errors. Okay, it's should be PSP dict. I think I may have used the different name in the actual program you download, but as long as we're consistent in the program. Okay, that looks good. So we need to do a little bit final bit of setting up, and then we can set up the plot statement. We need to load an option chain provider for the symbol that we're working on, which is the e-mini. So we do that using the method that we've created to create the option chain provider, and that is OCP load. And we're going to put in to that the name of the symbol, e-mini ATS, like so. Then having loaded that, we want to print the information and create those PSPs. And we do that in the print OC method, which calls the create PSP method. So let's do that as well. So it's print OC, and that is now, because we've got an OCP, an option chain provider called OCP, we're just going to process that using this method. So let's just verify that. Okay, so far so good. So the only thing we need to do now is we need to print the information, or plot the information for the PSP. Now, an interesting thing that happens with the dictionary is if you want to know the keys for the dictionary, you can get that very easily, and it will be put into a vector. Now we've got a vector called option symbols. So we're going to say option symbols is equal to PSP dict. We just say keys, simple as that, and that will store that information in that vector, which we can then use in this case in our plot statement, because what we're going to do is go plot 1, and we need to know the name of the PSP, or the we want to put in the close of the PSP. So we do that. This looks a little bit nasty, but it really makes sense if you study it slowly. So PSP dict, and we need the index. Now we know that the indexes are all now in this vector we've just created called option symbols. So option symbols, and we want the first element, which is the 0 element, and we want that as a string, so as type string. And then, having done that, we can then say as type price series provider. So effectively what we're doing, we're looking in our dictionary for this information here, which is the string index of where we've stored the price series provider. That's going to give us the price series provider. We're typing it like so. And then from that, we can now get the value. And that is going to be dot close, like so. So let's just verify that. Okay, that's great. So the rest of it is pretty similar. So what I'm going to do, I prepared that earlier. I'm just going to copy that in, and we just need to make sure that our dictionary is the same name. I don't know why the name changed along the way developing this, but there we are. Great, so let's verify that. And then we can go to the chart and we can turn off the study we have applied at the moment, which is the one that's going to be downloadable. Let's turn that to status off. And I'm just going to insert the new study. So it's throwing an error there because it's saying we're not telling it what symbol to use. We need to add an extra line here. So psp.symbol is equal to SYM, which is the symbol being fed to it, which would be the options. So that looks good now. So we'll just go back to the chart and studies, edit studies, and the one we've just been working on is this development version. Then if we examine the print log, we can see various interesting things showing the state of the OCP from loading to loaded. And we can also see the PSP state from loading to loaded, but you'll also notice that the names of each of the symbols are included here because we added that to the print log. And then you can see some of the information about the symbols here, showing the exchange, the expiry type, expiry style, strike price, ask, and so on. Of course, that's just a snapshot of when this thing was first run, but you can get that information in real time. Anyway, I hope you will find this useful, and it is available for download with lots of comments. And if you're not part of our email list, then please go to markplex.com to join the email list, and of course join our YouTube channel as well. Thank you.